Hello, hi everyone. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. Welcome back after a couple of weeks. I know Easter week was a week off, and then last week was kind of an off week in a different way. We didn't have online class because of changes in my schedule and circumstances, and I appreciate your understanding with that. I hope that wasn't off-putting for anyone uh, or anything like that. That just kind of threw my schedule off a little bit, but now we're back moving ahead. The last couple weeks we've focused on the identity of Jesus. Who is Jesus? Particularly, who is Matthew's Jesus? That was the big question. And hopefully the last couple weeks, the reading you've done, the thinking you've done, the translation of the passages have all contributed to getting a fuller sense of who Jesus is in Matthew's gospel. And we're not done with that. Just because the last week of focusing on Jesus's identity has expired doesn't mean we're done with that question. That question will still be part of our learning and our discussions moving ahead. But this next 2-week unit, remember, from here on out in class, we're working in 2-week units on certain topics and themes. And this next unit is the ethic of Jesus, or the ethic of the kingdom. And we certainly will be building on the identity of Jesus as we ask the question, what is the ethic of Jesus? The two certainly are related. If you recall the article by Dale Allison about the gospel being a biography of Jesus, and how ancient biographies are geared toward moral formation, then certainly the identity of this Jesus that Matthew's gospel is about will certainly play a role in the understanding of morality, moral formation of the community of people who follow Jesus. And so the ethic of Jesus, the ethic of the kingdom, certainly derives from the identity of Jesus, and then what you learned and read about the last couple weeks. But this week we're turning to the ethic. So we're asking a different set of questions. The flow of the work for these next couple weeks is pretty open-ended. There are certain passages that you will translate and exegete for each week, and that will be, your focus for that week. But beyond that, it's pretty open-ended in terms of the questions we're asking, the reading we're doing. Each week I'll provide you through the blog and through the Greek exegesis sheet a set of questions, things to think about, and through videos as well. But we want to just kind of dig in to this topic and use the reading material to help us. This week we return to Misreading Scripture. We'll be reading from chapter 8, which is about, the title is Getting Right Wrong, and it's about virtue and vice. And I think it's a very helpful chapter, very interesting chapter to read and to have in the back of your mind as you read that chapter. What is the ethic of Jesus? And how does this chapter we're reading help us think about that? So I'll have some questions about that on the blog, just to generate discussion. Because I think what they're saying in Misreading Scripture is very interesting and very helpful. To think about how we think about morality, right and wrong, virtue and vice. It gets us thinking about how we think about it in our context today. But then, of course, gets us thinking about how maybe the ways we think about it might be different, not necessarily opposed to, but different from how Jesus in his context might have thought about it. And sometimes that leads to reflection and rethinking what we think virtues are today and what Jesus's virtues actually were. And in addition to that, in the chapter on misreading Scripture, they work within the framework of understanding morality and ethics. They work within the framework of virtue and vice. And I want us to think, is that the best framework? Is the question of ethics a matter of virtue and vice, right and wrong? Or is the question of ethics Jesus' ethics, the kingdom ethics? Is it a question of something else? Is the categorization virtue and vice maybe not the best? Is there another way to categorize the question? And I suspect there is. I think that thinking in terms of identity might be helpful here. And I certainly think that Matthew's gospel pushes us to think in terms of identity, who we are as humans, as Jesus' people, when we think about ethics and morality, rather than just virtue and vice, right and wrong. Think in terms of identity. So have that on your radar for the next couple weeks. The question of identity, the question of living fully as a human. How does Jesus model that? And then how does he teach it through his modeling, through his identity? How do we derive our identity? And then, as a result of that, our ethic. So the question to think about is beyond virtue and vice. Not necessarily virtue and vice is wrong, but beyond that, think of ethics in terms of who we are and whose we are. To what or whom do we belong? And that might help us place the Beatitudes in terms of understanding ethics. That might help us place the passage for this week, Matthew 5:13 through 16. Think of that passage in terms of defining identity rather than doing. And that makes me wonder, and when we think of ethics today in our culture, are we too performance oriented? Are we work-based in terms of our thinking of ethics rather than identity-based? So some questions to hover over our discussion, our reading this week and next week for that matter. So read the chapter from here, and then Scott McKnight's commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is the central part of Jesus' ethic in Matthew's Gospel, and one could argue the central part of understanding Jesus' ethic in all the Gospels, even though all the Gospels don't have the Sermon on the Mount. But we're dealing with Matthew, and so the Sermon on the Mount will be sort of our playing field for the next couple weeks. So I encourage you to read the Sermon on the Mount. The passages we'll be translating the next 2 weeks are from the Sermon on the Mount. And I encourage you especially to read the introduction in McKnight's commentary, but then read the sections that deal with the passages you're translating. Let McKnight speak and share some of his thoughts and put him in conversation. I encourage you to read other sections of the Sermon on the Mount too. I'll throw some passages out to you to read. And use McKnight's commentary as you investigate and read and translate. So that's the stuff for the next couple weeks. Jesus's or the kingdom's ethic. What is it? How do we understand what it means to be a Christian on the basis of these questions? And how do we better understand Jesus through the ethic? And how does our understanding of Jesus inform our ethic? And how do we better understand who we are? That's the big question. That's the thing people in congregations want to know. They're wondering whether they say it or not. It's in their brains. It's in all of our brains. Who am I? Who are we? And what does that mean for how I go about my life on a daily basis? That's fundamentally the question we're asking for the next couple weeks. And ultimately it derives, like I said, from the identity we get from Jesus. So if our identity, how we identify Jesus, is a little bit non-gospel, not based on good exegesis, then our answer to the question, who am I and how do I live, is going to be equally maybe on the wrong foot. We haven't had our V8 yet today. We haven't got it quite straight. And maybe it's not a matter of getting it straight, but certainly it's a matter of understanding Jesus and who we are better. So, we want to get all these things in conversation. I think of the confession of Peter in Matthew 16, where Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter lands on the confession, "You are the Christ, the Messiah." And Jesus says, "You got it. And then Jesus says, but now I'm going to go suffer and die. And Peter says, no, you're not. And immediately Peter doesn't get Jesus' identity anymore. And the trajectory would be then Peter doesn't fully understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to live as a follower either, if he doesn't understand suffering as central. And so there's all these are connected. There's a trajectory that we get from the identity of Jesus to living the ethic that we want to, again, hover around and connect those dots. So I'm looking forward to reading what you write. I'm looking forward to good discussion, conversation on the blog, and online discussion as well in our class. So welcome back. I hope hopefully the next few weeks as we finish the semester will be enjoyable and continue the learning for Ministry for Exegesis today. So I look forward to talking and seeing you all again soon.